Welcome, everyone. We are seeing people joining from all around the world, and that's great news. We have an exciting topic to talk about today. My name is Jerry Zandstra. I'll be the host of this webinar. And again, the webinar is Mastering the Art of Global Learning, Strategies for a Multicultural, Multilingual Workforce. With that, we'll go through a few housekeeping things. We hope that this will be interactive, so we really want to encourage people to ask questions. Some of you, many of you have been on webinars before. You know that often the questions are saved till the end. We would very much appreciate the opportunity to answer the questions that you have in the moment. And so we ask that rather than putting them in chat as questions come up, put them into the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer them as we go. And then we will be sending out a recording. We've had more than, I think, 550 people sign up for this webinar, which is an incredible amount. And we'll be sending around a link to all of you who have joined live, and then to those who were unable to make it today. So those housekeeping things, sort of another fun housekeeping thing. At the end, we're going to ask you to do an evaluation to let us know. We want to be continually improving. And so for those who fill out the evaluation form, we'll do a drawing at the end. And the person who is drawn will receive a $100 Amazon gift card. In every webinar I've ever done, I win this every single time. So, I will try to be fair to other people too. And I know we have a bunch of people on from Amazon too. And you shouldn't be able to receive this. You probably have enough Amazon gift cards. So we encourage you to do that. And then next, we're going to offer a global learning audit. This is a service that Ingenuiti provides, and we spend some time with you thinking through some of the challenges that you have in learning, and talking about ways that we can build a roadmap for you. So if that's something that you're interested in, click on the QR code here, and that'll help you register for that. We'll repeat that at the end for those of you who want to listen first before you decide whether or not that's something that you want to do. By way of introduction, I'm joined by two panelists today. But before we get to those guys, I just want to say a little bit about Ingenuiti. Ingenuiti has been around for multiple decades. Its areas of service and expertise are custom learning solution development, and we do that for some of the largest companies in the entire world. The second service that we provide is localization and translation, and we do an enormous amount. I think, Nathan, you can probably address this, but I believe I've seen a stat that we have translated north of 1 billion words, some incredible numbers. And then the third thing that we do is staff augmentation. So we provide staffing services for learning teams, for IT in some cases, project management in others, but we are a full-orbed learning, development, training, translation, and staff augmentation company. So with that, Nathan, would you introduce yourself, please?
Certainly. Nathan Driscoll. I'm the Vice President of Operations here at Ingenuiti. I oversee production, IT, variety of things, but I spend most of my time with our learning services group, so whether that's on the development or on the translation side.
Great. And Adam, if you would, please.
Yeah, my name is Adam Ealing. I'm the Vice President of Client Services for Ingenuiti. I've been really partnering with globally operating training departments for about 15 years now. One of our first accounts that we were partnering with is actually Skillsoft, so that goes way back to when library content was really the only kind of e-learning you were going to get. You wouldn't have the customizations and tailoring that we're going to talk about today. So that was kind of our first taste of what that would look like.
And at the time, that was spectacular. I mean, that was life-changing for many organizations.
That's right. You could join, you'd be hired and you'd be assigned, 200 courses that you'd have to take, and that would be it. So yeah, I oversee client success here at Ingenuiti, and I live down in Charleston, South Carolina.
Great. And my name is Jerry Zandstra. I'm the Senior Director of Learning at Ingenuiti. I have been in learning, training, and development for more than 30 years. A long-time student. I remember there was a moment in my life where my kids were doing their high school homework and I was completing some program or another until finally my wife said, okay, that's enough. You need to focus. But learning, training, and development has been a passion for many decades, and conversations like this are just thoroughly enjoyable. So let's get into the content. I want to start with a story, and it's a story a few years ago. And you know, those of you who love learning and development know that narrative and stories are wonderful things. They convey purpose and meaning. And the story that I'm going to tell you was I was hired, as I said, a number of years ago to buy a manufacturing group in the United States to go down to their plant in Mexico. They made automotive parts, and they had similar machines. They had somewhat similar processes. And the challenge was that in the United States, the machines were north of 95% efficient. In Mexico, in the Monterrey area, those same machines were 65% efficient. And so the company sent me down there. They said, this has to be a learning thing. It has to be a training thing. And so can you go down and figure it out? So I went down and I spent a week looking, watching, observing, and building relationships. And the managers of the company were not forthcoming, but most nights, because I was in town, we'd go out for dinner. We'd have a little tequila. We'd occasionally find a cigar or two, and we'd have interesting conversations. And as we got to know each other and trust each other, I said to one of the plant managers, "What's really going on here? Why this gap?" And he said, "Well, to be perfectly honest, you're right. It is a training problem." I said, "Great. That's a problem, you know, we can address. That's why I'm here." He said, "Here's what happens. The guys in North America create this training. They create it in English. They never speak to us. They never ask us what we need. They have it translated. It's not translated well. It's translated by somebody in the plant in the United States who speaks both English and Spanish. Spanish is a second language, not a first language. So by the time it comes down to us, the translation is bad. They haven't bothered to ask us about our needs. Oftentimes, they're training us on stuff that doesn't really apply to where we work, to what we do, or the processes that we have." And he said, there's all sorts of strange expressions in here that don't really apply to our culture. And he said, I'll tell you the truth. He said, when we do training, when our people will all do it, and this is e-learning at the time, he said, when they're doing the e-learning, they'll do that sometimes in the morning, and then they get together at lunch and they laugh about it. They tell stories about how bad it was, all of the funny expressions, who caught the most mistakes. And he said, no one here takes training and learning seriously, because we don't think you mean for us to take this seriously. And then he said something I'll never forget. He said, it's like the employees, the team members in Mexico, are looking into a room that they're not invited into. And he said, we're looking in and through a window, and he said, the window is dirty. So we're trying to understand what's happening and what we're supposed to be doing, but we're not included in the process. We're not involved in the opportunity to, participate in the kind of needs and training analysis and so on. We're not involved in any step of the process. It's like this is an afterthought. And he said, so, at the end of the day, we all conclude this really isn't even for us. And so he said, you're right. We need to address training, but the US-based company needs to really up its game. That has been more than a decade ago, and I have never forgotten that. Unfortunately, that story is true. There are some stats from McKinsey. Many of you recognize that name, a globally respected research firm. They did interviews with 300 senior executives fairly recently at global companies, 300 people. And here are some of their findings. Of those 300, only a few believed that they were good, that their company was good at transferring lessons learned in one context or in one market to another market. Now, not all of those lessons are learning, but many of them are. That we're not transferring the way what we need to transfer into other cultures, into other regions of the world. And then the second stat was only, as you can see, only half were confident of the effectiveness of their training and development for different regions of the world. When McKinsey produces research like this, it is well considered, and the research is solid. It's not encouraging for us. And then another perspective. This is Asperian. Their research, again, it's not encouraging, but their most recent data on global change management initiatives demonstrates that 75, nearly 7, I think it was 73% of all change initiatives fail to produce any long-term sustainable gains. This is depressing for those of us who are involved in global learning development and training. And then secondly, almost half of these initiatives don't produce any measurable results at all. So not, 3/4 of them don't produce long-term sustainable, but half of them don't even produce short-term results. And so we're here to address, that's the point of this webinar, is to understand some of the root causes, some of the underlying causes of that, and then get to some of the ways to address it, to some of the fixes for it. So we're going to dive into what we call some of the common missteps of building learning for a global audience. And the very first one is demonstrated by the manager down in Monterrey, Mexico, who said, we're just not included. We don't include local team members in learning development. And Nathan, I'm going to pose the first question to you. Where have you seen this? Where have you seen that sort of myopic view of how to build learning, training, and development?
Several years ago, we had a global life sciences client. We were developing a series of courseware targeted towards management, actually, but we knew that there might be a global audience for it, and we started the conversation during the analysis phase of who would the target market be? Would it just be for the US? Does this need to go through Europe and Asia as well?
Mm-hmm.
And for a variety of reasons, they didn't really want to talk about that at the beginning. And unfortunately, towards the end of storyboarding, we discovered that they had decided that they wanted to launch it globally in English only. And that really changed the tone and the way we were writing the content, because we needed to make sure that we were adequately writing for an ESL audience to make sure that everybody was going to be able to understand it properly, and it affected our timing and our sense of pace throughout the entire course.
Yeah. But nobody, if you're deciding this in headquarters and you don't know, and your headquarters is US based, and you haven't had any conversations with anyone outside of that, that's going to be it's going to be problematic. Again, for those of you who are attending, if you have questions, I want to encourage you to put them as you think of them into the Q&A box. And even if you don't have questions, if you have comments as you hear some of these missteps, I'm not asking anyone to publicly, admit their missteps, but please contribute to the conversation. Adam, the next one is global needs versus local needs. Does everyone in your organization actually need this? And what are the local needs, and how would you know them?
Yeah, we've certainly seen this pop up as a primary challenge for a lot of organizations, where they'll invest in training initiatives that go out to little acclaim or applause, lack of engagement within that content, and so certainly a poor return on their investment as they're engaging with those team members. Similarly, to your story earlier, Jerry, where there was investments being made in the training, but it wasn't driving any results. So, being able to have regional or local partners it helps you decide and determine exactly what those needs are and what the best way to engage with the team members will be. And I know we'll touch on a few of those additional items as we're moving into best practices.
Yeah, we will. For this second one, if you're not engaged with people outside your own group, or people outside your own culture, people outside your own geographic location, you have a perspective that everybody has the same needs that you have. And yeah, so Sean's asked a good question. How do you balance global need versus local need? There are certainly times when there are global needs, and everybody in the organization needs to know the same thing at the same time. But to assume that for every single learning asset that you create and every learning experience that you create can be disastrous. And part of the problem is when you deliver learning to people that don't need that learning, it begins to damage the learning culture, because it communicates to the people that you're asking to invest their time in learning, training, and development, your employees, that you didn't really even bother to find out what I need right now. Debbie, yeah, we have this issue as a global pharmaceutical company with sites all over the world. The complexity of that it's remarkable. Debbie, I just finished an ebook on a fictional global pharmaceutical company. I named it Del Pharma, if you like the name, and I named it after my granddaughter, Delphine. So she got a kick out of it. She's 10. She thought that was pretty cool. But just talking about in the ebook, and we'll be sending you the ebook, by the way, but talking about the challenge of this company happened to be north of 50,000 employees with sites all over the world. And now you add pharma into it. And then you add the challenge of all the local regulations, national and international regulations. The complexity grows immensely. And underlying all of that, Debbie, is there are times if you get the training wrong, or something is mistranslated or misrepresented, people can get hurt or worse. Or if you're providing lockout training, lockout tagout, or people are working with dangerous chemicals or in a dangerous environment, my goodness, the potential for disaster is very, very high. So understanding global needs versus local needs is certainly key. And then to move on to another common misstep that we see is that we think everybody is motivated by the same things. Not all learners, of course, are motivated by the same thing. I remember we created a highly competitive game that was played by individuals. And of course, everybody could see the results of the game in their location. And in some parts of the world, the game worked wonderfully. In really highly competitive areas of the world that were, that placed great emphasis on individual achievement, people loved it. People played it. They were enthusiastic. In other places that were more communal-based cultures and more team-based cultures, it didn't work well, because they didn't want to publicly shame people that they were working with. And so at the time, we didn't fully understand this. It took us a while to understand this. Some other common missteps of building learning for a global audience. Culture. Adam, talk to us just a bit about culture and why it matters. We're going to come to a deeper conversation about culture in a little bit, but what are some of the things that you've seen about misunderstanding or lack of understanding, and occasionally causing offense or worse?
Yeah, so I think one of the best examples actually comes from a book from Malcolm Gladwell. Some of you might have read. He's a pretty famous author, has a lot of great and interesting books. They're short reads and worth your time. One was called Outliers, and he has a story in there about Korean Air, and Korean Airlines was having issues, to put it lightly. And unfortunately, in 1998, they had an airline crash that killed the majority of the people. And so they started looking into what was going on there. They were losing partnerships. Delta had pulled away from a partnership program with them. They had a 17 times, they refer to it as higher loss rate than United Airlines. That's scary, certainly in the airline industry. And what they
Yeah,
found
thanks. I'm
was,
flying in a few weeks, so I hope you
yeah.
end the story, Adam, by telling us that they fixed this.
Yeah, back in 1998, you probably weren't looking to book through Korean Air because
No, I
it was
wasn't.
getting scary.
Yeah.
And what they found when they went back and listened to, you know, the black box and everything that was going on is that there was really a cultural issue there, right? Where people were deferring in the cockpit. So co-pilot was deferring to the captain, and was not speaking up about a risk that they had with being low on fuel. So it was very suggestive, like, oh, maybe we should think about, you know, landing sometime soon rather than being definitive. Like, we need to land now and we have to figure this out, right? So what they realized was that there was this cultural undertone that was impacting the way they operated. So there are times when you want to embrace cultural norms, and there are times when you have to determine for the good of, you know, that activity or that action that you have to address it. And so I think that's a really great example to call out. Sometimes, you know, as a corporation, we can embrace a culture for a particular training program, and sometimes we need to say, no, this is the way things are going to be done. And it's a fine line, but it does have to be defined.
It is a fine line, and it takes intentionality there. That is a significant challenge, knowing when to say everybody's going to do this all the same way all the time, and it's a global standard versus a local standard. Barbara's asking, when you went to Mexico, did you converse in English, Spanish, or a combination? I would say it was a combination. My college Spanish was a while ago. And so, yeah, that was a situation. But more significantly, do you have situations where the local team does not have an adequate grasp of English? Absolutely. I think when you look at globalization, at the start of globalization, not you know, the post World War II first companies, but when globalization really started to spread in the 70s and the 80s, many of those companies, from my research, had the assumption that, well, of course, everybody, no matter where we're going to go, is going to speak English, and the assumption was deadly. Then they said, well, maybe it's just, you know, we're gonna make sure all the management is bilingual. Also, not an adequate response, and so most companies have worked very, very hard to be multilingual, multicultural, because they need to be. You're communicating something of value. If you assume that everybody on the local team has an adequate grasp of English, I remember I was traveling with one CEO one time, again on a train, and he would walk up to people in the plant and just assume they could speak English. They 100% could not. They knew how to say hello, and they knew how to say goodbye. And his conclusion at the end of that was, well, you know, their English is pretty good. I said, really? Ask them how the weather's going to be tomorrow, because they don't know what you're talking about. And so any assumptions about languages have to be left at the door. So that leads us into translation. Nathan, that's you. You are the translation royalty around here, with understanding the process. And I should say too that our CEO is a fascinating guy. He speaks 5 different languages.
5 languages.
Grew up in Europe and has lived all over the world. But part of the passion for creating learning in the languages that people need it is driven by him. But talk us through some of the translation potential missteps, Nathan.
From a pure translation perspective, it's accuracy is important, but even if we look at the back end information, it's are you ready for translation? So dialing back a little bit to the cultural perspective, I always try to avoid using thumbs up and thumbs down in training materials, because in the US, that means yes or no, good or bad. But depending upon your culture throughout the Middle East and Asia, thumbs up frequently will have a different connotation. You need to know where you're heading to.
Not
It's
a
more
good
than
one
just,
either, right?
no, not a good one.
Some of you are laughing right now because you know what that is. It's not good.
Yeah, no.
Mhm.
And it's one of those things you need to know who you're speaking to. And it's more than just the words that are being said. Another example I can think of is we were developing a course for a manufacturing company on their safety. And for the scenario, we were playing around with the idea of saying, always be sure to wear your safety glasses if you're using a drill to put a toggle bolt or a molly bolt in the drywall. And thankfully at the time that my PM that was working the project happened to be from Guatemala. And he said, well, in a lot of the world, we use cinder blocks and there's no putting anything into the wall because it's not drywall, it's something solid. And that scenario wouldn't have meant anything to anybody outside of the US and parts of Europe.
Yeah. Rachel, thanks for your comment. It's in chat. I just want to encourage everybody to put them in Q&A, but Rachel's tells a quick story here. Translation is critical with many pitfalls. I had an e-learning to translate into Canadian French. The powers that be didn't understand the importance of localization, and not just major language categories. You just communicate a lack of value. That at the end of the day is what you're communicating. If you don't bother to communicate with them in their language and in a way that understands their culture, my goodness, think of what you're communicating. Those of us in the learning, training, and development industry in the last number of years have been really focused on DEI. And unfortunately, we don't think of that. We think of that as DEI in our culture. In global companies, that has to become global. It has to become the whole world. Is that hard to do? Yes. Is it complex? Yes. But that's the job. And building those relationships and learning from one another is fantastic. Rachel, I'm sorry to read that the powers that be didn't understand that, and I hope you find a way to communicate the importance of that, because you really are hurting the overall learning experience. There are some other missteps, obviously, beyond translation, technical challenges. Many of us know this. Limited internet connectivity can be devastated, and certainly YouTube. YouTube is just one example of a platform that's not allowed in certain regions. So you build out your content. You've got a bunch of YouTube videos that are illustrative and built in there, and it turns out people can't play them. When they get to them, they find out that they're not allowed. And then one that's particularly interesting to me, it's something Ingenuiti's been diving into, is that many learners do not have corporate emails. And what an enormous challenge that is. The people that tend not to have corporate emails tend to be non-desk workers, right? We would have called them blue collar workers. They tend to be positions where there's a great degree of turnover, and the reason is emails are expensive and loading them into the LMS is expensive. I had a couple of conversations recently, one with an organization of 300,000 employees, and I learned that 50,000 of their employees do not have, never will have, emails. So they are not part of the learning management system. So even compliance stuff that is mandated is not delivered in many places around the world and around the United States. The expense, of course, of email, if you know about this, is astronomical. Emails for 5,000 people can be $300,000 a year annually. And of course, then there's LMS seats. And so we're in the middle of building a platform that will not require emails. More on that soon, but this is a big challenge. One of the guys that I was talking to was said to me, for a majority of our workforce, it might as well be 1970. Here's an interesting comment. Another issue is the inconsistency of computers and laptops across our organization. Some people are using very old computers, and yes, manufacturing people who share computers and don't have emails. That's for sure. And so the thing is, Debbie, most of them have phones, right? And yeah, that's a challenge. workaround I've found, I think, Margaret, this is you, is to create dummy emails so that those who log in can log into the LMS. I figured we'd get some comments on this, and we will have articles coming up and some webinars coming up. But if you want a longer conversation with us on that, when we get to the end, you'll see that little QR code again, and we'd love to talk about that. Because we think there's some interesting questions. And then, of course, there's the question of quality assurance, right? We've been in this. You create this wonderful course, and you're going to translate it, and you have it translated, and it comes back, and you don't speak that language. How do you do that? So let's get into some best practices. I listened to a podcast recently of three people who were heavily involved in learning, training, and development on a global scale, and one of them just said this. The sentences stick with me sometimes. Just this phrase. She said, "You need to learn to put on a global hat. You just need to learn to think about the enormity of your job and the location of it." And so we'll just quickly work through the ADDIE model here. Some of you use the ADDIE model. Some of you use a modified version of it. Some of you use Alan's, Sam. There's a variety of different ways, but every single learning project, no matter in what order you put these things, has to have some form of analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. So let's look at analysis. We'll just look quickly at each one of these stages. Analysis in the global context. So the question for that is, whose opinions are being considered? Nathan, I'm going to ask you to talk about that a little bit. You do an enormous amount of analysis. You're involved in analysis of almost every single learning and translation project that we do. How does global how does global fit into the analysis stage?
It really requires reaching out to as many stakeholders as you can. So if we're talking about a training course about financial management or any elements like that, every country is going to have their own separate financial regulations that they have to comply with. So from a globalization perspective, the training topics are going to need to be high level, because Germany is going to be different than Argentina. So you need to make sure that the stakeholders in each of those countries are getting a certain amount of buy-in about what's being trained at the big picture. But then on the flip side, for American companies, every American company has to comply with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So that section, that training course would have to be developed specifically with US law in mind, or if you're a European company, the EU has had their equivalents as well. Right. So it's identifying those stakeholders is critical.
Yeah. And it's those relationships. Back to your story about the training with drywall. You would never have known that. You couldn't have Googled that. You wouldn't have understood it. The only reason you found out about it is because you had a SME, subject matter expert, who was local, who said, "Hey, Nathan, that's a miss."
Yep.
Otherwise, you would have missed it. And those kinds of strong relationships and including people from the target culture, the target region of the world, is vitally important.
And Jerry, just to make sure, because I think one of the things that comes up there is that, paralysis by analysis, right? That's the concern. We talk about including as many stakeholders as possible. Well, to a degree, right? You include too many people, we'll never, we make a joke that, you can get that project in 2030 by the time we're done.
Maybe, yeah, it might be late.
The partners that we see that do that really well, they have a predetermined organization that's going to structure it that way. So if it's going regionally, they'll have a regional head that can own that component. So they're still centralized, but they do have it predefined of who's going to provide feedback by when, because otherwise we've been in situations where, of course, it just drags on for months and months and months, which, hurts the opportunity to hit the learning objective. So I'd say, for the stakeholders, it needs to be predetermined, already before you get into the conversation, and you're really going to elongate that timeline.
Yeah. That's an excellent point, because I mean, no one can imagine building a course with 50 different SMEs in 50 different locations. But you do come down to the relationships that you have and the people that you trust, and listening to them and seeking their wisdom and seeking their advice. So let's move on to the next steps. It's design and development. And again, who is included in the design? Who are the SMEs going to be? What roles are you going to need, and where are they going to come from? Nathan, you were pushing earlier the idea of deciding early on into which languages and into which cultures do you intend to release this training. That can't's a strong word. It's a bad idea to decide that when you're implementing and go, oh, by the way, I think we were supposed to translate this into French Canadian, right? You're a little late in the process. So Nathan, design, just any thoughts there on why making those decisions early on in that analysis and design phase really matter?
It really sets the tone. I mean, one of the most common components I can think of is if we're working with a manufacturing company and the SMEs are likely the engineer or somebody like that who's involved in writing those processes, and the content is written at a college educated degree level. But if the people we're training are in factories anywhere else in the world and they might not have those same college degrees, we need to be sure to be using terminology, both in the language we're drafting it in, and presumably English, so that way it can be either given in English if those employees are bilingual, or translated into the target language. So say it's somewhere in Latin America or in China, so that way they can understand it.
Yep. Let's move right from that into development, Nathan, because obviously who's included in the development, but things like images and colors and voices. You pointed out something recently to me on the color red, and it was fascinating. It made me think really hard. I think of red in one particular way, but the rest of the world does not.
Correct. I mean, in America, red is frequently a cautionary color. We have red lights, stoplights for a reason. In China, red is good luck. In other countries, it's bad luck. And it flips all the way around. And I mean, for me, color is important, not just for that, but if we're looking at being inclusive, there might be colleagues that are colorblind, and we need to make sure that colors are not only being used to convey a status, and we need some form of icons or something, another visual cue on that point.
Yeah, Gretel's got a good comment here, and then I'm going to ask Adam to weigh in. Gretel says, in general, I believe culture is too underestimated, and we would 100% agree with that. We set all the emphasis into learning a language, which is not wrong, but we isolate the language from the customs and the habits. We need to remember to communicate concepts or ideas, not only words. Adam, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good call out, Gretel. Thank you for that. I think one of the most fun examples of this is we designed a learning game, was to be accessed on people's mobile phones. It was similar to Fruit Ninja. Anybody that out there knows that time wasting kind of game? Well, part of the idea was to tie in that to engage with a team based in Japan for a globally operating pizza company. And what we learned is that pizzas in Japan are not the same as pizzas in the United States. So we think that's really simple. Pizza is pizza. It differs, from New York to Chicago, let alone once you go around the globe. And we found out that squid ink is a topping that you can have at a pizza in Japan. So yeah, culture goes way beyond language. Language is certainly the root of it, but Gretel's absolutely correct. It's a broader issue to address and to build into our learning content than just language.
Yeah, I grew up near Chicago, Adam, and I don't ever remember squid being on the pizza. And I know
seaweed. Any seaweed on yours?
No seaweed. I know Nathan grew up in upstate New York. That whole pizza thing there is completely wrong. according to a Chicago guy. So, and then just the last two steps we'll cover pretty quickly. Just implementation. Who will be included in the pilot testing? That's a pretty big one. And then just a question to put out there: how are you going to market this? This is one of the great needs we see in learning, training, and development. Is that sometimes we think we create a thing and then we just, you float it out there and people are really excited and you put a lot of your heart and soul into it. Not many companies are thinking about marketing, and they're not thinking of their learners as consumers, and how to sell. Okay. Yeah, here's a question. Please provide guidance on marketing. Yeah, so a couple of companies that I've worked with in the past have actually engaged their marketing arm to help them think through. I'll tell a really quick story and happy to continue this conversation later, but we created this friendly little competition. We posted some little hints, some little suggestions without explaining what was coming on their email systems and around the plants. And then we created a game, and then the teams, and it ended up with one global team competing against the financial team for how to run the company's finances. But the whole thing was built up in marketing, and it was very planned out and very intentional. That marketing piece is a really, really big deal. More coming on that soon, but we would love to engage with you on it. We want to talk, and then evaluation, of course. ROI. We'll have more conversations coming up about how to do that. It's one of the essential things that L&D people need to do better at. But let's move on to culture. That question has come up a few different times in a few different ways. What is culture? There are a lot of ways to define it. The way that we think of it is it's a shared mental framework that motivates a given group. And we've talked a little bit about this. I mean, some cultures are motivated by rules. I will do this because you told me to do this. In others, I will do this because the social expectation is there. I will do this after you tell me why it's good for me to do this and why I need to do this. You have to explain it to me first. Or it's in my best interest to grow in the company. There's a lot of ways to think about that. Culture is a massive question, and so I'll just open it to Nathan and to Adam. Any thoughts here, guys? We've released training in, I would think, virtually every culture in the world, or many of them. Any thoughts that you have on this? Adam, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's also interesting about culture is that it is changing, right? It's not set in stone. So we worked with a large Bay Area technology company that was training employees in Japan. Typical business culture in Japan has been, for the past 50 or so years, pretty straight laced. It's a very formal culture. And the content was translated in a formal way, which is typical for Japanese business culture. And we received feedback that it just was not engaging the employees. And what we didn't understand was that the employees there, because information just wasn't shared, and also on us, we didn't ask at this time. We didn't understand that the average age of employee was like 20, 21 years old, and they had shifted away from that culture, and they wanted it very casual. So much more like the Bay Area technology companies, right? People aren't going to work with suits and ties. So even the language had to move from a more formal business culture translation to one that fit the actual company culture that they were trying to engage with or establish within there. So I think outside of the fact that we need to understand, what culture looks like within the area or region, but also it gets right down to generational and what's shifting in the generation within that particular culture.
Yeah, thank you. Nathan, anything? Otherwise, I want to move on to some best practices in localization and translation, because I suspect that many participants in this webinar have questions about this.
The only thing I would add is the modalities being leveraged. So particularly if you're using gamification, if you're targeting the training towards a culture that's more compliance based, like they're going to take the training because they're told to, the gamification elements are going to be different in that audience than if you're looking at somebody that's hugely competitive, and that's where like the leaders board, like you mentioned earlier, is going to be beneficial.
Yeah. Ryan's got a great question here. He says, following up on the global versus local standards comment, and I think, Nathan, this is to you. Do you have an example of how to balance this in a matrixed organization? For example, finance may have standards for L&D globally, but those might not align with standards in different regions. And he's obviously pointing out the learner who's in finance. They say, well,
Mhm.
you're pulling me in two different directions here. Do
I-
you want the local or do you want the national, or rather international?
I'm going to default to following the corporate policies and standards as my first go-to. So your corporate policies are frequently going to be drafted predominantly around the laws of the country that you're incorporated in. And that's, from my perspective, that's where a lot of businesses will see the most risk. But yeah, I mean, it's tricky. In the past, we have had the umbrella course about financial management or financial regulations. And in those cases, you might need to have a specific
Mm-hmm.
sub module written for that target market.
Yeah, choose your location.
Choose your location. The same is true in medical devices, because every country has its own medical device regulations. So you might have your generic, okay, we're going to make this version of the course for the US market, but
Yep.
before it can be translated into Italian, it's got to be adapted for the Italian regulations as well.
Health and safety, same.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
Compliance issues, same.
it always makes sense to start with the corporate policies first and then figure out, can this be neutralized so it's globally, or do we have to customize it for each locale?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you. And I should tell you, Nathan is a law school graduate, so any advice he gives is not legally binding, right? Do you want that disclaimer out there, Nathan?
Yeah, definitely not. No, let's not
Okay.
get into that.
Yeah. Best practices on localization. I think this is to me one of the more compelling slides in this slide deck. And so, Adam, I want to ask you to address this.
Yeah, we've obviously seen a big shift over the past few years in corporate culture to be more inclusive, to embrace diversity. That's been really great to see how that shift has been taking place. But likewise, we want to make sure we're doing that on a global level, and I think Jerry touched on that a little bit earlier. And I think some of the things that really pop out to us. This is just from Forbes Insights. They polled executives, and they said, in managing a diverse workforce, does your company face language barriers between executives, managers, and other team members? And over 65% of them respondents said yes. And
Yep.
then what they positioned to is they said that miscommunications contribute to inefficiency, employees can't collaborate effectively. So there's all these things. So a lot of times when we're looking at specializing our content based on region, so whether that's from a cultural perspective or a language perspective, there's always this inherent cost. But then when we look at what these executives said what the impact was, miscommunications contributing to inefficiencies, lack of collaboration, productivity being lower, and what's the overall cost of that? So our stance certainly is how we can partner with organizations, find out the way that they can really become inclusive in terms of their language. And so we're seeing that more and more within organizations that are trying to embrace that whole idea of diversity and inclusion and tying language into that.
Thank you. Let's go on to just some really practical considerations, right? I mean, if you work in this area, you're fairly familiar with them, adapting design and layout to the display text. You know that when you translate things, some languages expand, some languages contract. English tends to be a fairly concise language, so when it gets translated, it expands a bit. And Nathan, you want to just quickly walk us through a couple of these others?
Yeah, an important one I would say is dates in particular, because obviously in the US we follow the month, day, year cycle. But once you go into Europe, it flips, and there can be a lot of confusion if somebody's confused if they're talking about the fourth day of the month or if they're talking about April.
First time I traveled in Europe, that I got very confused on airline tickets. Yep.
And then there's countries that put the year first. So you just need to know what's needed for the target audience that you're translating for. And then when it comes to the content, this all goes back to as early as you can during storyboarding, is some of my favorite examples are exaggerations and parody that might be intentionally used throughout the course. One is we were crowded so tight that when one person inhaled, everyone else had to exhale. That's not an easy sentence to translate into a lot of languages. And parodies can be even worse. So you really need to know, you either need to exclude that or know that once you get to translation, it requires a more creative workflow where the linguist isn't just translating what you wrote, but they're having to adapt it for the local audience.
Yeah. And we should tell you too, we looking ahead a little bit, we plan part 2 of our webinar series will be focused on internationalization and localization and translation of training material. So we will provide in coming webinars a lot more information for that. Just for some key takeaways for immediate impact. The very first one is obviously establish a plan for global and regional training initiatives. I would emphasize things like building those relationships, identifying those local stakeholders and SMEs. Secondly, defining training goals by region and country. This gets back to the finance question. Okay, you've created this thing generally. What needs to be tweaked to make it applicable to other regions? Because you will really harm your learning culture if learning does not apply to them. And then obviously identify technology gaps per country for whether it's connectivity or whether it's they don't have emails or whatever they are, but address those things. And then of course, global inclusivity. And this, I think, if there's one key takeaway, at least for me, I've had the opportunity to travel to, I think, more than 35 countries in my life. I've learned an enormous amount from doing that, from diverse cultures and being inclusive and having that open mind and open heart to learn. And when you can take that back into the things that you do, and then you're going to communicate back into that culture, those are incredibly important things to know and to learn. We're going to put up some resources here. Some of you have read these books. Some of you have not. The Culture Map is a great book, When Cultures Collide. And then one of my favorites, I've actually had the opportunity to speak a little bit with David Livermore, but Leading with Cultural Intelligence. And then, of course, another resource is the Global Learning Audit with Ingenuiti. We'd love to have a ongoing conversation with you, and we'll pop up that QR code again so that everybody can see it. If you want to have the Global Learning Audit or you just want to have further conversations, click on this and we'll look forward to those conversations with you. I think we have addressed the questions that I've seen in the Q&A slot, but in the couple of minutes that we have remaining, please post any questions that you have now, or we'll be in contact with you too. So if you have other questions that you weren't comfortable putting into the Q&A box, that's fine. We'll address them as we can, but we'll just give you a few seconds to post those. And while we're waiting for that, just a reminder of the Amazon gift card. Later today, you'll be receiving an evaluation form, and we ask you to take that seriously. That's really helpful to us because we are people that want to continually be better at what we do, and to express our thanks, we will provide that gift card. So I don't see any remaining questions in the Q&A box. So with that, we are going to say thank you. We appreciate the gift of your time. You are all incredibly busy people, and we are thankful for you. We hope that you have a great morning or evening or afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you.